J. Serra's idea being to secure the Californians' future by holding their lands in trust, which is to say safeguarding it for the Indians as an off-limits custody, to be returned back to the people directly once they had time to achieve legal recognition from both majesties. That's the way the world worked then and there. As you can see, California was being torn apart by two very divergent agendas. One celebrated by our heritage as Americans in the United States of America, and the other celebrated by a community that at that time was the biggest superpower in the world and was the one that was in charge of anything and everything pretty much that was going on. Serra could have resigned. But true to form, he stood determined to not back down, giving his life instead to advocate for those who would otherwise have had no voice whatsoever. Now, forget the 50 missions that J. Serra had planned. He was lucky to launch 9.5. That he is condemned today by many members of the very community that he fought to protect is classic also, and every adult in this room understands that. Every parent in this room understands that. We've all been there, done that. It's just the reality of trying to deal with disparate agendas. But I think about his mantra, and I think it would apply for all of us. If we move ahead respectfully, and he was by the definition of respect, he would have been X'd if he were closer to headquarters because of the way that he dealt with the people that were here and celebrated and lived like them. He was a very unique individual. His mantra, I think, would suit each and every one of us, regardless of what is important to us. He would simply state, no matter what happened, to quote him, always forward, never back. I think that that's a great mantra for anybody with any plans in their life. I mentioned briefly in that interview that this is just a snippet of my 3 decades of research on California history, and I came upon all of this wonderful material because people identified the fact that I was respectful of everybody involved in the story. And so they would say, Adam, I want you to come here, I want you to come here. I had one gentleman who said, I want you to call me when you leave your home, which was 4 o'clock in the morning, and meet me, and I want you to call me then, and then meet me at a certain place, and I will hand you the document. I've had that happen to me on several occasions. And why the intrigue? Because there's huge agendas that have already decided what our story is, and damn it, the hell you're going to stick to it. But you know, we're big people here. We're not preschoolers. And we know how to, I can respect John here if he's a Mason and I'm a Catholic, or if I'm a Mormon and he's a Jew, or I can, or you know, whatever. We're big people here, and we are the hope of the world. So if we can't get our act together, nobody can. I want to thank you for inviting me to share this, and I thank you all for giving me a moment to share. And I'd love to answer a few questions.
Adam?
But don't want to take too much of your time. I'm here till this
What do you think
sun goes down, moon comes.
Ken Burns?
I love his work.
So his work
Which
is-
one?
Well, the West, the whole West series, which
I love that. Oh, and I have to share this when you were talking about your new display.
Yeah.
I coined my title, California West of the West. It was Teddy Roosevelt who coined that phrase, and he coined it not very far from here. He was whistle stopping across the country. He dropped down into Cajon Pass and found himself in a wash in orange groves and Moorish architecture and all of this stuff, and a world he could not have even envisioned. And his host, his tour guide, was Charlie Lummis, who founded, Land of Sunshine and the Southwest Museum and all that, where I've done a lot of my research. And Teddy turned to his secretary, George Cortelyou, and he said, George, we're no longer in the West. We're somewhere west of the West. I love that. That's where that comes from. And it's right near here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
So my series of national parks, I did a whole series of books on national parks, and I was living in Arrowhead at the time, so I also did one in Arrowhead. But I've done Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Denali, that was kind of fun for me. Things like that, Sequoia Keys Canyons. Anything else about our topic today? Yes.
You did the Spanish have any of the slave trade like the English did?
Yes, they did. And the black, see that, I had another film clip to show you, and that's precisely what it was, Carol. It's Carol, right?
Yeah.
Carol, that's exactly what I wanted to show you, and John and I think can vouch for me. I couldn't get sound, you couldn't hear it. It is exactly that. And the reason there was, if I had another hour, I'd love to address that topic, but there was a group called the Society of Jesus, and I'll be really, really brief with this. Isabella, and you know, everybody knows the story about Queen Isabella and everything. She was adamant about the conquest being a success, and she would send people that she perceived as being trustworthy over to conquer these lands, but she would saddle them with a covenant. And the covenant was that you can exploit this, but you have to give these people an education and employ them. Everybody abused that. Everybody abused that. From Christopher Columbus on, who we all think of as a hero. He and his brother were horrible. And I'm sorry, but we see that still in our California today when we see people that are working for a couple of dollars an hour and doing just about anything they can to get by. And I don't think necessarily that my neighbor is evil because he drops over to Home Depot and picks up some guy and pays him practically nothing to work all day for him. But, oh, that's the same issue. And so that thing fell apart. So there was a group called the Society of Jesus. Now, you and I know them. Tony mentioned them to me earlier as the Jesuits. And they thought, you know, this has got to stop. This has to stop. So we're going to go in and we're going to be the people that intervene. We're going to put Jesus back in charge. That was the idea. And so they went in. They wouldn't let any conquistadors get involved. They'd let no Spanish subjects involved. The only players were the people living there at the time. They knew what was coming up the road behind them. And this is where I get a little bit, having had a missionary experience, and everybody thought I was with the CIA. I know the United States flew in afterwards and bombed the hell out of the place and threw, you know, assassinated Allende or Pinochet and did all those things. But I had nothing to do with that. And the fact that I showed up from BYU talking about Jesus, it's not my fault, you know? And everywhere I turn around, people say, oh, you must be with the CIA. The missionaries didn't have a political agenda, although they were, on some levels, there were missionaries that did have. Serra's political agenda was humanity, just like the Jesuits. He was a Franciscan. The Jesuits came in knowing this was happening and locked everything off, as Serra did here. California was never a part of the Spanish crown. It was a Roman custody. That's not taught to our children either. Even the king had no say-so, although, of course, in that world, he had a, you know, he's rubbing elbows with the Pope. They were very, very close and tight. But at any rate, if you lived there, then they would open up the kitchen, make some nice food, invite you to come over, sit down and eat, and start talking about, you can say Jesus, but I'm going to say, they would start talking about, especially referring to people like Serra, Western civilization. I've seen his library. He brought in all this stuff that was just incredible. The missions weren't laid out so they'd be a horse ride from each other. The missions were laid out on a floor plan or a grand design that was dreamt up by a guy named John Duns. You see, you've all heard of the dunce cap? John Duns was a genius. It's not Duns, it's Duns. You're the genius that didn't do your homework, so you're sitting over there in the corner. That's what that means. John Duns was a Franciscan, and he wrote a book about how he thought it would be to live in heaven, how heaven must be laid out. And of course, the brothers loved him. Serra sat as chairman of the Department of Studies of John Duns at the Lillian University in Majorca in Spain. And Serra taught this, and he went on a mission because he wanted to inspire. And so a utopian community had enough room for, say, I don't remember the amount of people it is, 1,000 people to live, and everybody have their home, their school, their church, their farms, their animal husbandry projects. That's what he laid it out for. And actually, he laid out what was going to become California as he envisioned it, to ultimately, it would have gone clear to the North Pole. But he started out with 50 of them. So, at any rate, that's what he was trying to do. So, the fact that these guys were trying to convert, well, that was also part and parcel. You know, you weren't a citizen. Or, I'm sorry, there were no citizens. You weren't a subject of the crown unless you were Catholic. That's the world that they lived in. It's like if you live in Utah today and you're not a Mormon. You have no voice unless you live in Salt Lake. You have, that was part of what was going on. And that's just a reality. I'm not advocating for it. That was a reality. So if you could stand up for yourself in front of the church and the king, which meant you could talk for yourself in court, there you were. And that was important. And the only way to get to that stage was through the program that Serra was installing at the time. In our own country, Serra Winnemucca, it wasn't until her that the Native American peoples of the United States of America were even recognized as citizens of America. So, you know, we have to just be respectful and have a discussion.
Excuse me, can I?
Sure, Stuart. And then don't, John, you're in charge here.
Well, I don't, it's
love
difficult.
decision.
It's,
Yes.
you know, I didn't take the pledge, and it's difficult to respond to your comments without using inflammatory language. My background is in Native American history, and the concept, you know, I'm reminded of Mahatma Gandhi to ask him what he thought of Western civilization. Does anyone know what he said? He said, I think it's a good idea. You know? Now, the idea of coming over here, you know, and that Indians somehow transform into citizens of our country or something like that. Well, plainly they had government, they had
There were
ritual culture, they had, going back to time immemorial, excuse me, let me speak this. Now, the mission system, you know, can be, in my view, accurately portrayed as something comparable to the death camps. Now, when, for instance, the local people, the Van Yumi Serrano, who were the people of the Mojave River here, and by the time Alfred Kroeber got around to interviewing the last survivor in 1899, and his authenticity is even disputed. The reason for that is because when they were by force, with exceptions, but generally by force and extreme violence, you know, in the name of Jesus or whatever, they were, you know, forced into the mission system in a system of quasi-slavery, and when diseases hit, they weren't allowed to leave, what was known as a cimarron, a runaway. Now, the idea that Spain or any country had the right to come into their country, it's not like they're trying to earn the right to, you know, citizenship. You know, I mean, by what legitimacy does Spain or later the United States, you know, even, you know, make such a presumption? Now the results, we're all sitting here today, you know, and the people who lived here since time immemorial, who I believe, you know, I'll take an oath that they are just as civilized and have the same rights to maintain their religious system that goes back into time immemorial, has nothing to do with Jesus. You know, the result you'll notice is we're here and they're not, and what is known as genocide. And the perpetuation of genocide, you know, it's the documentation is extensive, and, you know, people talk about the missions, oh, isn't the architecture wonderful and stuff, you know. You think about the chamber of horrors that it actually was. Now, you know, and this can...
I have to interrupt you only because, all right, because of the fact that I have been given the privilege of presenting here, and I do want to say that story is also told in here. I encourage you to read the entire book, because this is what's annoying. I remember I shared with you, John, when I walk in Carroll, I get so frustrated because no matter if I'm talking about the gay community, then I have the straight community telling me that I'm blasting them. If I talk about the Catholics, I'm told that the Indians have been subjected to such horrible things, and vice versa. That's what this work is all about. And I can't stay here for 24 hours and discuss the whole thing. I would that you read it. I open with the God of this. There were several gods here. And several very organized belief systems and a couple of very advanced societies. And I would only ask you, before you get too anxious about our circumstances on the West Coast, that you compare them with what you know about the East Coast and what most of us in here are English Americans, what our people did with no effort made, or very minimal effort made whatsoever, to address the concerns of the Native people at all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like to give you one of our Historical Society pins. Okay, thank you very much.